So as far as I was concerned, it was just this figure from a dream he'd had, where I had to get some maroon to red face paint, apply it all over my face and neck completely. I had to black out my teeth and put this stuff all over them. And I don't know what's in it, but it tasted horrible and it burned my lips. I was crouched behind this big bin, looking very sinister. Like, evil, I think, is probably a term that could be fairly used. I walked past one person on the way there and they screamed, "Maroon Man! Maroon Man!"
Hiya, and welcome to another episode of Mandatory Redistribution Party. My name is Sean Morley.
And my name is Jack Evans.
This week's episode is about art, and how it can help us, mere mortals, glimpse the sublime.
And how its continued existence can only be justified if it makes a solid return on investment.
Much like northern children and the entire global south, art only exists to be fed into the open mouth of the economy.
This episode, we are joined by Mando's arts and culture correspondent Jain Edwards, with further special guest appearances from Sam Nicoresti, Tom Burgess and Josie Hypatia.
Thank you to everyone who supports Mando's on Patreon. We've been very grateful to everyone who's subscribed so far, and for our patrons, we'll be uploading an extended cut of one of the interviews from this episode.
If you are unable to do us a Patreon, we also very much appreciate a classic share on the social media platforms, or indeed text messaging a hyperlink directly to your dad. Thank you.
And now, to art. What is art?
When you get rich enough and you're bored of gold, then you buy art, and you don't look at it. You just put it in like a Maersk shipping container, and then hope that its value goes up. And the art, the more the value goes up, the better the art. That's what art is.
So it's not like it's not quite like putting your assets into gold. It's more like putting your assets into like a horse race and just hoping.
It's even better than a horse race.
Yeah.
I pay someone to decide what is art. They tell me, and then I buy that, and then I put it in a Maersk shipping container, labelled art. And anything that isn't in that shipping container is just frivolous.
Yeah, water, bricks. Yeah, I'm thinking about where you'd normally keep a Maersk shipping container. Really easy to make the distinction between art and not art.
Done? Answered?
I feel like I've got some reservations left over.
Move on. This isn't even a segment. What did we get? 2 minutes out of that?
Well, I'm still. I don't feel sated. What about new art? Won't that devaluable the other art? Isn't art subject to inflation? People are making art all the time.
Nah.
Children putting out drawings at a rate of knots.
Nah, children's drawings worthless, pointless, because they don't contribute to GDP.
They could do if they get in the Tate one day, make an unmade bed, or balance a lemon on a light bulb, or draw a splodge.
Is the lemon light bulb made up?
Lemon light bulb's real installation.
Oh wow, cool.
Well, someone balanced a lemon on a light bulb.
That sounds hard.
Yeah, probably is really hard. It might be like the Tower of Pisa, where it needs like 1 decade. Someone needs to like increment it by like a millimetre. Otherwise, the lemon will fall off the light bulb.
Is it real, or have they put like a pin in the lemon, or is it?
I think the value of that piece is predicated on the fact it's done with balancing alone.
Fuck.
Made you think, hasn't it?
I tell you what. Here's a question for you: are magic tricks art? Because a lot of people,
magic tricks art.
A lot of comedians get annoyed because comedy's not classed as like art by the UK Arts Council. You know, the real contest. Big question is is magic art? Is Paul Daniels an artist? Let's throw over to our arts and culture correspondent, Jain Edwards. Is magic art?
Is magic art? My only reservation with magic is that you're essentially copying other people. So you learn the tricks and then they're kind of passed on and on and on. So your only take on it is like a different outfit or like a different theme song behind it. Or I know I'll be like found dead in my bed in like a couple of weeks.
Someone will open your bed covers and like doves will fly out.
This is it.
And you'll never be seen
exactly.
again.
But I like magic. I like watching it, but the concept of it, I think, is just backpedaling.
Try to dig yourself out of dig yourself out of a grave here.
Things can be good without being art.
Yeah, that's true.
I like a cup of tea.
This is it.
I like a rabbit.
Every magician I know, at the Fringe or whatever, are pickup artist adjacent.
Yes.
Oh. Is pickup artistry art? It says it in the name.
It's like con artist, isn't it? It's not.
Are they artists?
It says it in the name.
Sandra Bullock in Ocean's 8. She's an artist.
It's a skill.
Being a con artist and being a pickup artist are like in the middle between two extremes. And those two extremes is being a painter and being a boxer. So I want to ask, is boxing art?
Boxing art.
You can paint with blood.
I think so. It takes like dedication. Maybe that's what the missing ingredient is, a level of dedication to something that's elusive.
Yeah. Could you be dedicated to not art? Could you be dedicated to something that's not art?
And then you'd make it art.
Right, so if I like just spent all my time just dedicated to doing a really good job at like being a receptionist.
It would be art. You'd be like a hostess then, wouldn't you? Or like you'd be like very, very skilled in welcoming people into a building.
And your boss would get really annoyed because people are just come in to see how good the receptionist is, and they're like, that's clogging up the arteries of this office. Because everyone's just in the foyer.
Yeah.
Taking pictures.
A lot of people kicked off because of that, reskill ballet dancer, government propaganda. But actually, if you reskill and you become a receptionist, you're still an artist. Possibly even more of an artist on that desk than you were in the ballet.
Yeah. People getting
Stop
really
complaining.
Angry about cyber. Cyber can be art. Have you not heard of GIMP?
Cyber can be art.
Cyber can be art, yeah, I reckon. Make a GIF.
A GIF's art.
Could you have a GIF where only one frame is art and the rest just junk?
And then billionaires start investing in GIFs. That's why they're trying to creep in really strict copyright rules everywhere. Yeah. So they can crack down on GIFs and then one person will have the GIFs.
Yeah.
That's the way it's going. Soon, art galleries, just QR codes wall to wall.
Yeah. And then that's the only way you can see that GIF.
Yeah. You scan it, takes you to Uber Eats. You can get someone, minimum wage worker, to bicycle you a picture. An Instaprint.
This could be quite good. Like, it could stop people responding to me with reaction GIFs, which I will support, even though it's in the interest of billionaires, because those reaction GIFs will be in a billionaire's Maersk shipping container on USB pens.
Just stacks and stacks of them.
That sounds good.
Well, I watched a really good 2 films recently, called My Rembrandt.
Yeah.
And that's like about a guy, people who are just obsessed with Rembrandt. They only buy Rembrandts. And this Dutch guy, who is like the 6th Jan Sik. So he's an aristocrat. And he is obsessed with finding new Rembrandts. And it's this kind of weirdly tragic story. It's a really, really good film. There seems to be like 3 films out at the moment about art and money and how... what is it? But one of the guys in them, The Price of Everything, says that art has to be really expensive because otherwise nobody would care about it. Nobody would keep hold of these things if they weren't expensive. Seems kind of fucked up.
Yeah, that is fucked. Loads of people try to rally to the defense of arts by going,
Art is one of Britain's greatest exports. It contributes X to GDP.
That is a fucking bad argument, man.
Yeah.
Because you could just take all the people that work in the arts and put them in the salt mines, and that might contribute more to GDP. And if you accept the premise of GDP equals good, it is literally saying that art only has value to the extent that it can make someone else money or make you money. Like, and that's fucked.
Like, I think in like previous centuries, people would justify like some completely over the top military programs and strategies and murder and conquering other people with the idea that this will ensure safety for the younger generation so they can just sit in a tree and eat Dairy Lee and write poems and think about art. But now we don't even have like that
Dairy
rhetoric.
Lee?
Dairy Lee,
in history, in the past.
What do you think Dairy Lee was invented? It's a type of cheese. All cheeses have always just been around, like elements. People discover
Introduced
them.
in 1950, Dairy Lee.
That's a brand, though, but the actual substance has been around since the year
Cheese, yeah.
cheese.
Dairy Lee?
Yeah.
What is Dairy Lee?
What do you mean? It's just a soft cheese. Dairy Lee got branded.
Yeah, but do they exist yet? All right, I'll allow it.
Thanks. But what was I getting at? Because previously the rhetoric would be like art, an ability to just have the free pursuit of art was like this utopian ideal that you could justify murder in the name of. But now it's sort of flipped in that you can do art only if it justifies like exports and the improvement of a state economy. So like there is no like utopian ideal that we go through like a lifetime of slog for. We can slog at anything you like as long as it helps the big guy, Mr. Nation.
You even get that when you first start doing something like stand-up because, your parents are like, not obviously having a go at my parents, but it's really like, what is this getting you? From your first gig almost, it's a bit like...
And when will you start making money?
If you do tell them, like, I opened this gig and got paid 200 quid, then
it seems worth it then. And I guess that's it on a small scale, isn't it?
And that gig you did.
Yeah.
Odds are you probably hated that gig.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what we're in it for is so like there's two ways you can go in comedy. There's the way that will make your parents go, all right, I'll leave you alone for a few months. And then there's the way that in any way satisfies why you have started becoming a performer.
People almost think jobs that are enjoyable shouldn't get paid. So they assume that arts jobs, because you're doing something you ostensibly want to do, that like it almost doesn't deserve money.
Yeah.
Almost any arts job, like you said at the start, Jane, of like it's like you're getting really, really skilled at this specific thing. There are such like precise skills in arts. There's general skills as well, but often they're like very precisely applied, and like it takes years to get good at them. So you're working at something, getting really skilled at it, but then it's really fucking precarious work. It's precarious. It's not that well paid. It has a chance of being very, very well paid.
And it does like this subtle job in a society, which is like the arts do something, or maybe like entertainment more specifically. It does something a little bit like reproductive labor, in that like it keeps your workforce sane and stops them going absolutely mad.
Yeah.
Like imagine a world with no entertainment. There's no telly to put on. There's no radio. There's no way you can go and see anything. And that people have the same kind of insanely like nose to the dirt work ethic that they're forced to just across the globe right now. They'd go mad. Like your workforce would just be killing themselves.
People would be like, oh yeah, STEM, or like industry. That's the thing that's worth, like if you work on designing the tech between like OLED televisions or super fast internet, like that in their minds would be more valuable because there's this material thing. And then it's like, okay, well, what are you piping down that internet wire? What are you putting on that television?
Yeah, why would people have that in their homes?
I mean, there's also the thing with STEM of there's a conspiracy theory of, they like push in to try and get more women in STEM, which obviously more gender parity across every aspect of the economy. Yes, please. Fantastic. But because women get paid less, because of the gender pay gap, the amount of women in an industry drives labor costs down for business. So loads of companies are very, very interested in getting more women in STEM because they want to drive the labor costs down to boost profits. And again, like obviously more women should, like gender parity across all aspects of the economy, good. But that cynical objective, fucked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I think about my pay, I told one of our friends a couple of weeks ago how much I actually get paid. He thought I was on, like, this entire time, 32 grand a year. I was like, and I've been friends with him for like 10 years now, and I was just like, what? Because I've worked in technology.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because I'm a woman, but it's just very like, it seems with everything it's harder just to walk in somewhere and just get something that seems fair. Yeah, I've never really been able to break that barrier, despite sometimes like carrying whole projects, doing like project management, doing this, filling all these gaps, being a deputy editor, you know what I mean? Yeah, you can never seem to get.
And that applies to artwork as well, right?
Yeah. Big time.
You don't get, I mean, the thing that marries the two things is that you don't get promoted to above a certain level by being good at the job, because you being good at the job means you should be exactly where you are right now. You get promoted by being my dad's friend, my dad, you're my child. You are friends with me. We grew up in the same area. You remind me of me.
Yeah.
This is what gets you up there.
Well,
definitely.
I think it applies to all art, but specifically with comedy, we can talk about how people who don't do it like have this assumed expertise, which then is exponentially worse if you're a woman. So there's the people with art, you know, like, oh, you know, we talked about like an unmade bed. People be like, oh, I
Could just bloody tip a bin or it's bloody shite.
Or the people you see online who think that painting gets worse because it's less photorealistic. Like these like weird ideas about art, but then the comedy version of it is the sort of guy comes up to you after a gig and it's like,
I've got a few for you.
and you're just like, Jesus,
Yeah.
I'm going to politely smile at you, but I need to get away from you. And we all experience that. But if you're a woman, it's way fucking worse, right?
Yeah, it's quite. But I think for me, it's always been worse when it's like the promoter to the person who's asked me to be there, and they've just clearly not been listening. That's always the. I remember I was once in Gainsborough, and I came off, and the promoter was like, "Oh, never apologise to the audience. Never do that." And it was, you know, like one of these bits I used to do where I'd pretend to fuck something up and then be like, "Oh, sorry, it's going wrong," and then immediately pull something out which shows that I know completely what I'm doing. So he'd like not been listening that much. He'd only heard me apologising, and like in front of everyone, he was like giving me like almost like a big telling off. I've just had that a couple of times where people have either just not been understanding what I'm doing, or just straight up didn't even watch my set, but need to give me some kind of advice. So they're just kind of coming up with anything.
Well, that's another thing, isn't it, that cuts across class and gender with comedy, of how intent, like the intent behind your work, of like you talked about intentional mistakes, and intentional mistakes are a really good tool. You know, Phil Ellis's Fringe show, Unplanned Orphan, which was just like fuck up after. The premise is basically how badly can and cringe can an Edinburgh show go fucking wrong. And like, you know, his accommodation falls through during the show, a fire alarm goes off.
Yeah.
And he's begging. At one point he begs the audience, he goes around the audience like begging for money with his hands out. And that review that was like, you know, it was a 1-star review and said, if this was intentional, it would be a work of genius. But it's one of the worst shows I've ever seen. And then I mean, it was fucking amazing, but you know, it sounds, I think this guy's from Preston. Nah, he can't be thinking about this. And that's also why comedy fans, but not mega comedy fans, who are like, you know, their go-to is like, oh, I like that Stuart Lee, he's good.
Yeah.
You know, Stuart Lee's like clever comedy. But what Stuart Lee does, and the way he is then seen as a clever comedy guy, is he meticulously explains what he's doing and why it's clever, spoon-feeding the audience so that they understand precisely that what he's doing is intentional because he's told you it is. Yeah. And he's got all the sort of class signifiers. People assume intent. And that is just worse if you're, I mean, never mind being working class and a woman, right?
And I think because when I started as well, I started when I was like 20 and I was really sort of, a bit of a mad dress sense and like looked young, you know what I mean? And kind of girly and whatever and bleached. Well, I'm not going to get into like stereotypes and stuff like that, but it's like, I think how I come across to people, because there are like young women that I've met who in comedy who are just so like, I mean, we laugh about girl boss stuff, but they are totally sure of themselves and totally like, I'm going this way, get out of my way, which is how you have to be. Yeah, it's like, and because I'm not like that at all, and because obviously I've been so shy for years, which I've grown out of a little bit now, but just through like years of forcing myself out of it. But being as shy as I was back then, it's just no one thinks you know what you're doing at all.
And I think that shows like the problem of inclusion as being a fix to the issues of culture, like of toxic cultures in comedy, because there have been loads of advances with women being more included in comedy. Massive way to go, but it's still a long way away from where it was.
Yeah.
But the ones that succeed have to replicate the worst toxic behaviours of the men who can succeed.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and thereby make even more impenetrable the idea that that's just the one way you do it. You've got to be just confident to the point of arrogance. And so actually some of those like gendered signifiers, like humility and not like shouting at people and not like really going hard, not just like on the audience, but just generally when you're networking, just so many loud egos in like
Alpha.
the green room. Yeah, if anyone like backs off from that, they're not only now overlooked, but also if you're a woman, you're going, just shows you just can't make it in this industry because you're not having to go on the punch machine in the green room.
I've had like conversations with people where, I'm like, okay, I'll go and talk to this person, or I've got an idea for this and I'll go and speak to this person. And sometimes especially when I meet someone face to face, I can just see like the light going out of their eyes, is how I always describe it. When they're talking to me, it's a little bit like as though you are speaking another language, because either they have a different impression of you, how you are online or whatever. And then if you're coming over and you're kind of seem shy, I always have this thing, whenever I meet people new as well, I can't help but like have these like weird stories come into my head that I can't help but just tell them about. So obviously they're just really like, what on earth? Why are you telling me about like the gunpowder plot? Do you know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know, it's just like a nervous thing. So I think from that, it's like immediately, it's not like they've just watched you die at a gig. I think even that is more forgivable than walking up to somebody who might have some sort of opportunity and coming across as you are, and not as just someone who's like, hey, I'm Jain Edwards, how's it going? Yeah, starting my own production company and all that sort of stuff, which obviously I'm not. It's really me. It's not based on, and this might sound a bit bitter, but it's not really based on your comedy or your skills or your writing skills.
Like anything in the capitalist hellscape we live in, art, comedy, it's not meritocratic at all. It's not based on merit. I think a lot of people have a delusion that, all you need to concentrate is your talent.
Yeah.
Which, comes back to the thing of the problem of saying art has value because of how much money it makes.
Comedy gets it both ways, because Arts Council of England won't fund comedy because it sees comedy as being financially sustainable under its own momentum, because they look at Michael McIntyre and they go, well, Arts Council funding wasn't necessary to make Michael McIntyre, it wasn't necessary to make Peter Kay. But then, so obviously they think comedy makes so much money that it must support the GDP and therefore could be art. But then when it needs money, they go, we won't give you money. Or when it definitely needs money, they go, it's not culturally relevant because we don't consider it art. Because in other circumstances,
because it makes money.
It made money.
Yeah.
Because it made money, you're not art. And when you lose money, you're not art. So comedy can't win by the same metric.
Well, and it can't experiment. It becomes trapped because it can't get that funding. And there's the thing of the best arts funding initiative there ever was the Dole, right? And Stuart Lee talks about that in his like autobiographies about how for years he was on the Dole, and Jarvis Cocker and like
Jarvis Cocker was big on the Dole, but Stuart Lee as well said he talked about a sort of a stupidly bloated managerialized public sector where you could do like the job of one person was split into 5. So you've got plenty of time to work on your routines.
There wasn't as much precarious work that often people do alongside arts jobs, you know, like 0 hours contracts at the fucking Crystal Maze, to name one that I know a lot of comedians in Manchester are on. It cuts across so many things. So I think one thing that would tie out almost everything we've just spoke about together is the sort of racial component. One of the anxieties I've always had about, you know, as a comedian, as a white male comedian in the sort of alternative comedy space is, not a lot of people who aren't white here.
Yeah.
But a lot of people who are white talking about how they're not racist. Like, that's such a topic of conversation and talking about race. So race comes up a lot of like, I met a racist the other day. Here's what they said. I'm not a racist and I can prove that because of rejoinder. I've had really awkward like feelings when I'm on in a gig and someone's doing that. And I'm like, the only black person in this room is the security. And they're not liking this at all.
It makes you, it's
horrible.
Because it's every layer of it, of course it's the economic layer, but also it's the stuff we were talking about. Women comics feel pressured into acting like the stereotypical alpha male club comedian in order to be successful, because you've got so many barriers to overcome of like, if you're not white, all that stuff about like intent and all that kind of stuff. Like if you start doing surrealism on stage, people will be like, are they going to mention that they're black? When they're going to get to that?
Yeah,
I don't know. There's this weird fucking like essentialism people have in expectations of what you're supposed to perform, and I think like that's I imagine there's of many factors where if you were not a white person, there's so many things about alternative comedy that say this space is not for you.
And it's not just your pub punters as well. I know like there are people who have gone to competitions and said, oh, you mentioned your homosexuality too briefly. It seems like you don't know what you're all about then, because your whole set, if you're gay, your whole set should have been about that. Or I've seen it in like industries that are sort of adjacent to comedy. So if you become like a comedian of color, you get brought on to talk about some of the politicized elements that are part of being that race. And they're like, I'm not an expert on this. I'm just, I just talk about things that make me laugh. It's too much to ask me to become an expert on this just because of my skin color. That's crazy. And I'd say that some of the biggest people I know that have found this element of comedy like almost impossible to get across is trans comedians.
Oh fuck yeah.
Because that element of, I guess, transness feeling like it's this new or like to your average member of society more confusing concept, it is a complete barrier to someone just listening to what the performer has to say. And it's like, when are you going to address this and calm me down? When are you going to make me feel comfortable with seeing a trans person? And so if someone wants to do anything beyond talk about trans issues, it feels like it's impossible. But if you say that comedy is supposed to be original or transgressive or do anything interesting, you cannot advance that kind of performance or that kind of material if you are from a starting point that is perceived as different from the norm.
Yeah.
Hi there, I'm Josie Hypatia Grounds, and I chose that name myself because I'm a trans woman. The middle name Hypatia is from the female librarian of the Library of Alexandria, who was killed by fundamentalist Christians with razor shells and then had her life's work destroyed in a fire. If someone were to ask me what I do creatively, I would always go with how my partner describes me, which is as a show-off. I've always enjoyed being on stage, and I used to do ballet. I spent a long time being a live musician. I have acted a little bit, but it was only when I transitioned in my 30s that I had the confidence in my own identity to go up on stage and try to perform stand-up. I knew I was trans from the age of about 4 or 5. I envied my younger sister. I wanted to wear my mum's shoes, and I would put her costume jewellery on when she was out of the house. I would lean my head back so the hairs at the back of my neck would encroach down my spine and I could feel a bit what it would be like to have long hair. And quite soon after that, I discovered comedy. I was, I think, 9 or 10 years old, and my dad let me stay up late to watch Vic Reeves' Big Night Out. And it was the first time I'd seen comedy that didn't presume that everyone was a man who liked a woman or a woman who liked a man, and therefore this is the kind of thing you will find funny. It existed in a world outside of the conventions of normative society. So ever since then, I have been more drawn towards absurd, surrealist, Dadaist, metatextual humour because it doesn't make assumptions about the audience. That kind of comedy takes you on a journey to a non-existent world. They didn't exist in a world where people went to work or drove a car, and that was they existed in a world where people had fingers made out of cutlery or giant foreheads. And for a lot of growing up, I felt that I was in a world that didn't exist. Certainly it didn't exist in anything I was taught at school, because it was a time when discussions of homosexuality weren't allowed in school. When you start doing stand-up comedy, all you've got allotted to you is a 5 or a 7 minute open mic spot. I wanted to take the audience on flights of fancy. I wanted to establish surreal worlds and unusual modes of performance. But inevitably, the question was there, why are you not addressing the fact that you are a trans person? One thing I did for a while, which I thought was, which to be honest didn't work, was I would come on stage holding a viola as if I was going to be a musical comedy act. I would wave that around while introducing myself. I would perform my 5 minutes of material, and then I would walk off stage having never even played a note on the viola and without even mentioning that I had it. And after the performance, quite often people would come up to me and say, I'm a bit confused. You had that like big violin in your hands. Why didn't you play it? I thought you were going to be a musical act. And I said, the reason I did that was so that the first question I was asked when I left the stage wasn't, why didn't you talk about being trans? Because I didn't want to talk about stuff that causes me pain, I suppose. I don't know. Having spent a couple of decades struggling with my identity, I didn't want to relitigate that to every single stranger I spoke to. I wanted to talk about things that I found funny. All of the types of comedy that I enjoy, all of the surrealist, absurdist, metatextual comedy, by definition exists one layer removed from the reality of most audience members. So if you exist outside of the straight white cis man monoculture, not only am I taking people on a journey away from the airline peanuts world of conventional stand-up to a surreal world, I'm having to drag them from their assumptions about my identity and their lack of trust in me to even start to make that second journey into the absurd. Unfortunately, what that means is quite often there's a segregation of performers. I know for a fact that there are very vibrant black comedy clubs because the audience don't need to be explained what the black experience is. One of the best comedy shows I ever performed at was an all-woman and non-binary show that was arranged by a couple of women, one of whom's queer, one of whom is not white. And after a few of the acts had been on, I realised that I no longer needed to litigate my identity before I started my performance. So it freed me up to be able to just dive headfirst into what I wanted to perform. And it was one of the best experiences I ever had. But unfortunately, it is a very rare and very uncommon experience to have. Before the pandemic, I was wondering, is the live comedy arena a place where I have a future?
There is sort of one full-time professional comedy reviewer and critic. There's a website called Chortle. That is the outlet. They explicitly went on a headhunt for a working class or BAME reviewer because they decide people's careers. If you get a 5-star review from Chortle, there will be interest because we just have this one monolithic outlet. So they looked for a working class or BAME reviewer. They found a guy from Nottingham, working class guy. They offered him £400 to go to the Fringe for a month. £400 is around a third of what your accommodation alone costs. So you would have to survive in an expensive festival, pay 2/3 of your accommodation, then food. Presumably you can get show tickets for free, but that doesn't, then you're living off nothing. It's completely impossible. That's their working class representation.
Fuck. All the things that we know from experience are fucked about comedy, exponentially copy and paste across the whole like culture industry. I almost don't want to bring it up, but there was some really good shit in both the Labour manifestos in the pre-haircut night era. And like it had a section in 2017 called like Culture for All. You know, they're going to put billions into arts and culture, more social housing construction. And in the social housing construction, they would build like music and performance venues, creating spaces for communities to make art. Everything we've spoken about is like trying to hone your craft in order to sell your craft as a commodity. But like, is it not perhaps more interesting to have people from your community performing in community spaces all across the country rather than it just being projected out by millionaire comedians? We're talking about a lot at the same time, but I think we need to remember it isn't just a problem of, oh, it would be harder for a black or trans person to produce art as a commodity in a certain way. It's also, we have to challenge that premise in and of itself of like, is that the goal, right?
Yeah.
Is that clear?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going mad.
I want to elaborate on it because I think you're absolutely right. This idea that we have like monolithic celebrity figures that come out to London and dart around like either a small theatre network or they do comedy clubs and then they go home. Yeah. That conception as artists that come out from the big city and then grace our communities and then go away is absolutely fucked and stupid. But to even conceptualize of doing it another way is so hard. Like, I have been in comedy clubs in the north, in working class areas, and like the guy on stage is doing an observational routine about the difference in wattage when you go on holiday to America, and he's getting absolute silence, and he's in the green room going, did I like fluff one of those lines? It's like, they've never been to fucking America. They don't go to America once a year, so they don't have like regular memories of what the fucking plugs are like. What's wrong with you? But the guy who booked that club at that time lived in Cambridge. So if I wanted to perform at a comedy club that is walking distance from my flat, I would have to go to Cambridge or London. There's another comedy club, which is like a 20 minutes drive from where I live. If I wanted the guy to ever see me, he lives in London. I have to go at least 4 hours down. Yeah. That's like a massive round trip to perform at a comedy club that is around the corner for me, because we see the idea that comedians have these sets which are about nothing and they're about nowhere, and they travel to communities they don't know the first thing about. They might mention like a famous ring road or something, but people clap because they're like, wow, you know about the fucking ring road? You've blown my mind because you're from London. We have artists around the corner that we don't know the first thing about, but we know a lot about people who live in places that we don't know the first thing about. And why is our art structured that way? Why don't we have a community? Do you know Leicester? I really want to put Leicester on the map because they had that. Leicester comedy scene was so fucking good. And then Leicester Comedy Festival, which is the 4th biggest comedy festival in the world, built a festival on top of them, completely ignored them, and then told them that they wouldn't acknowledge them in their own award ceremony in case the festival looked parochial on the national scene.
Exactly. We get the same in Manchester, don't we, where promoters... I mean, I haven't been booked really in Manchester for about... over a year, maybe more, in things that by other people, by like other promoters here. And all the time. I mean, they bring people over from America sometimes, but we don't even get, I'll get an open spot once every 2-3 years, and it's always when they're desperate. It's always ringing me and being like, Jane, someone dropped out. Are you around? Like, what do you do now?
There's no real like nurturing of the scene.
No, not at all. In most cities that you start in, for some reason that's the case, because you go to another city, I go to Newcastle, you're like a queen. Everyone's like, love what you do, please come back whenever you can, we'll put you up, we'll do this, we'll do that. The clubs that are on my bus route, Won't touch me.
Well, I think the most charitable interpretation of that is just they sort of saw us when we sucked because we were the most new. But like, fuck that. That's fine. Like when you're new at a thing, you're not as good at it as later. So, but when you go to another place and you're more formed already, then people are like, fuck, this person's really good, because that's their baseline of you. And I think it's that combined with like, ooh, London, ooh, shiny.
Yeah.
And also the fucked economic thing of, we need to promote this so people, they're to an extent cogs in that fucking giant machine of people give audiences give status and know these acts more because of the touring system that Sean explained. So therefore they're going to promote them because that sells tickets, and ultimately they're a business and they have to think about the bottom line, because like I say, they're symptoms of the disease, because no one's thinking about art other than like, because even if you think of like professional artists and art's a profession and comedy is a profession, you're limiting how you think about it, because you're thinking, we were talking about comedy and it won't get Arts Council funding, but even that is a limited way of thinking about it, because really to solve these problems you need this like big holistic view, like as I mentioned earlier, like thinking about arts not just in terms of how can we target funding, but as part of your public house building policy. Like that's how you think about it, of like, or you think about, not just targeted arts funding, but you think about like, how does this exist as part of a livable wage or good welfare systems, or, UBI or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you'd solve so many of these problems, which is fucked, isn't it? To when you're like, oh, there's this thing that's making my specific life hard and depressing. And then if you dig, you're like, oh, it's capitalism.
Yeah.
And capitalism can't even use its own logic to solve some of these problems, because like it is probably in many ways cheaper and more effective just to build a small, flimsy DIY art centre than it is to put like the necessary hundreds of millions into mental health support. But it would solve a lot of the same outcomes. You only need a couple of shitty open mic nights, and like you've probably take at least 5 people back from the brink.
Or push them over. Yeah.
Sorry, mate, that just didn't fly. People really just don't remember Gordon Brown's policies. We can't be talking about that now. Well, I guess it comes back to the age-old thing of you have to support the things that are local to you and get involved in it. And I don't mean do it as like a
keep
piece.
Supporting live comedy.
Well, I mean, we all say it, but I think we need to frame it not as like an action of individual largesse, but you actually go in and mesh yourself in a community that then you are trapped in because your friends are all there. So try escaping now, idiot. All your friends are in the community. We need to get rid of these ideas that some art is legitimate and some is illegitimate, because we've got all these biases. Like one of the greatest hurdles for overcoming trying to make gigs accessible to people with no money is that there is like a well-known psychology to how much you ask for something. Because if you ask for less, people are like, well, it's going to be fucking shit then, so I'm not going to go.
Yeah.
But if you ask for more, then like the kind of people that are going to come to it, I hate the kind of audiences that can pay £15. But occasionally I need to play to them, but I don't like them. They're very old.
Well, we had a big debate about this and sort of accessibility and concessions when we were talking about the Christmas show we ended up doing on election week last year. We were like, well, what price should we put on it? And we were like, well, when we put things at an affordable price that we think is like the ethical place to put the price, they tank. So we were like, fuck it, let's just copy other people and put it for 14 quid. What happened? They sold out 2 nights.
And there was a point where we had to build another row against fire regulations and literally build it on the stage because it was so sold out and so full.
Because people went, oh, that'll be good.
This is it.
Same act.
Do you know what it is, though?
It's the same acts that have been in the city for
no one can say else. Yeah.
Money brings money, status brings status, and confidence brings confidence. It's all that shit, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's just this giant, like, the only way to solve it is to untangle all these things. Like, you need to build a new form of culture that isn't connected to how much money it makes, and its value is in and of itself, not because of some sterling value.
Some of the best art and performances I've ever been to or have experienced I experienced with just 5 other people in the audience, and I could just put what I want in the bucket at the end. Like, I've never had a life-changing experience as an audience of art surrounded by lots of other affluent people. I've always seen something that was
so true.
Okay. But the stuff that had absolutely done my head in and like I think about to this day were weird productions made on the fringes of cities by, you know, talented but bad at marketing artists who made nothing, and it was seen by so few people.
To this day, I'm completely haunted by Sam Nicoresti's preview show, you know, sat on the top deck of a repurposed bus and then looking out of a window at
Maroon Man,
who, you know, Sam had got to stand in a dimly lit, like, underroad tunnel. You know, that's the kind of experience you're talking about where you're like,
yeah,
fuck, this is good.
I am now scared. Because you're never going to have that, right?
That is art.
But you're never going to have that in a big theatre full of bourgeois people, right? You need to be in a fucked up place, right, where you can genuinely think, this guy could kill us.
Yeah.
You're never going to have that at, like, the Albany.
Well, yeah, and it's midnight and it's totally new and no one's ever seen it, and like I got to be honest, of course it's elevated because I know the person who made that thing. It naturally makes it more exciting because you have a relationship with the person who's making the thing.
And it's what let you access the fear, because you knew through that social knowledge that he might kill you. Yeah.
In 2018, I did a show called Bedtime, which was on the top of a double-decker bus, and it was a sleepover with me in the audience that turned into this waking nightmare. There's a bit in the show where I say, I'm going to order a pizza for everyone, and I need someone to look out. So obviously it's a bus, so you've got the bus windows, and I say to, you know, someone at the front of the bus, okay, listen, you're on pizza lookout. I think the pizza's going to come from down there. We muck about a bit more, and we try and do a prank call, and I source all of the numbers from the audience. So, you know, okay, 0, 7, 8, and we get the number down and we give it a ring, but it's number not recognized, doesn't work. It's a big disaster, it takes ages. Then later in the show, I'm just sort of talking about having a good time with all my friends, how happy I am, everyone's here, and this phone goes off. You can hear this phone ring in, and I'm getting really angry because, you know, it's a sleepover, but it's also a comedy show and you should turn your phones off. And I'm like, whose phone is this? Who's got their phone on? How rude. Hold on, it's my phone. No, I pick up the phone, and it's the number from earlier that we tried to ring as an audience, and there it is. You can see it, 0784 whatnot. And I just go deathly quiet and pale, and I stop talking, and then the phone picks up, and this voice comes in, and it's Maroon Man, and he's saying,
hello? Did you call me? Did you call me? It's time to go home.
And this is going on, and it's this kind of weird atmosphere where suddenly you're watching me on stage and I've stopped moving. I'm not doing anything. Where the person is looking out for this pizza, you've got this one person. All the other windows on the bus are kind of boarded up to make it like a venue, but at the front you could see out the front of the bus. So you've got like this group of 2 or 3 people who are looking out the front down this kind of alleyway near these bins, this kind of overpass. And suddenly from out the bin steps this figure dressed all in maroon. He's got maroon trousers and maroon shirt, maroon braces, and his face and hands and all of his visible limbs are painted are just this vivid block maroon.
Maroon Man! Maroon the Man! Maroon the Man! Sad.
Except for his eyes, which are white. And he looks up at the bus and points very slowly with a shaking finger right at the person who's looking for the pizza. And then he runs as fast as he can into the bottom of the bus.
Sam.
And then it cuts out.
Sam.
Sam never really fully explained to me what Maroon Man is or represented to him. So as far as I was concerned, it was just this figure from a dream he'd had, where I had to get some maroon to red face paint, apply it all over my face and neck completely, which then vanished into a maroon shirt I was wearing with maroon braces and tie, maroon trousers I had on as well, I think red socks and brown but could pass for maroon at night shoes, and some red gloves as well. And I also had to I had to black out my teeth and put this stuff all over them. And I don't know what's in it, but it tasted horrible and it burned my lips. And Sam required me, again, he didn't really explain why, to wait around for a bit and then just appear in his show near the end. The bus was in the middle of this quite busy thoroughfare that people would be moving through. And at the edge of that was a small row of big blue skips. So once I had got dressed, Sam said I would have to wait for probably about 30 minutes. I expected it would probably be longer. And it was significantly longer, that I was crouched behind this big bin, looking very sinister. Like, evil, I think, is probably a term that could be fairly used. Waiting for Sam to ring me as a signal. And so I walked past one person on the way there, and they screamed.
It was good. I thought it was quite funny, but I mean, it was actually a lot more scary than I thought it was going to be. It was actually terrifying. People were screaming.
When you're in a normal venue, you're enclosed. There are no windows in most cases. If you're in a normal sort of black box space, you are just within the world of that show. In a bus, you can see the outside, but then you see this show has actually extended beyond that, and there are sinister things out there that are coming towards you. And your venue is now actually a trap.
Maroon Man. Maroon Man.
Mandatory Redistribution Party was created and produced by Sean Morley and Jack Evans. Our title theme was created by Ella Jean, additional music from Drawjack, Josie Hypatia Grounds and Sam Nicoresti. Thanks to our guests Jain Edwards, Josie Hypatia Grounds, Sam Nicoresti and Tom Burgess. Check out the description for links to their various cool projects. If you enjoy Mandatory Redistribution Party, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple to help others find us, or supporting us on Patreon. Thank you for doing so, and thank you, of course, for listening. Farewell, friend.